Hannibal Barca, the man who challenged Rome. Hannibal Barca stands as one of history's most brilliant military commanders, a tactical genius whose name struck fear into the heart of Rome at the height of its power. His extraordinary campaign against the Roman Republic during the Second Punic War, 218–201 BCE, remains one of the most daring military ventures in ancient history. Early life and background. Born in 247 BCE in Carthage, Hannibal was the eldest son of Hamilcar Barca, a prominent Carthaginian general and aristocrat. The Barcid family was among Carthage's most influential noble houses with a long military tradition. While we know much about Hamilcar, little information exists about Hannibal's mother, whose name has been lost to history. Carthage, founded by Phoenician settlers from Tyre in modern Lebanon, around the 9th century BCE, had grown into a powerful maritime empire by Hannibal's time. Located on the North African coast near modern-day Tunis, it was a sophisticated civilization with impressive engineering achievements, including an advanced water collection system and a magnificent double harbour that could accommodate 220 warships. As historian Serge Lancel notes, Carthage was probably the richest city in the Mediterranean, more beautiful than Rome, as refined as Athens. Its wealth came primarily from trade in the fertile lands of North Africa, with the city exporting wheat, olive oil and wine throughout the Mediterranean. The First Punic War and its aftermath. The rivalry between Rome and Carthage had already erupted into open conflict during the First Punic War, 264–241 BC, which ended in Carthage's defeat just 6 years before Hannibal's birth. This war primarily centred on control of Sicily and naval dominance in the western Mediterranean. Hamilcar Barca had never been defeated in battle during this conflict, but the Carthaginian Senate, dominated by wealthy merchants who preferred trade to war, surrendered to Rome. The humiliating Treaty of Lutatius forced Carthage to relinquish Sicily, withdraw from surrounding islands and pay 2,200 talents in war reparations. This surrender deeply embittered Hamilcar, who believed Carthage could have prevailed with proper support. His resentment toward both Rome and the appeasing Carthaginian merchant class would profoundly influence his son. The Oath of Hatred. In 237 BCE, when Hannibal was 9 years old, Hamilcar prepared to depart for Spain to rebuild. Before leaving, he brought his young son to the Temple of Baal for a solemn ceremony that would shape Hannibal's destiny. According to the Roman historian Livy, Hamilcar was about to carry his troops over into Spain when Hannibal, then about 9 years old, begged to be allowed to accompany him, whereupon Hamilcar, who was preparing to offer sacrifice for a successful outcome, led the boy to the altar and made him solemnly swear with his hand upon the sacred victim that as soon as he was old enough, he would be the enemy of the Roman people. This oath of eternal enmity toward Rome would define Hannibal's life purpose and drive his remarkable military career. In Spain, the young Hannibal received a comprehensive education. His Greek tutor, Socylus of Lacedaemon, taught him to read and write using classical Greek texts like Homer's Odyssey and Aristotle's Logic. Simultaneously, he underwent rigorous military training, learning swordsmanship, archery, and horsemanship. More importantly, Hannibal observed his father's campaigns against the Iberian tribes, absorbing crucial lessons in strategy, tactics, and leadership. He learned how to move armies across difficult terrain, how to outmaneuver enemies, and how to inspire loyalty in his troops. By age 19, Hannibal was leading small scouting detachments in battle, gaining valuable first-hand experience. When Hamilcar died in battle against the Vettoni tribe in 229 BCE, command passed to Hannibal's brother-in-law, Hasdrubal the Fair, who recognized the young man's potential and placed him in charge of the cavalry. After Hasdrubal's assassination in 221 BCE, the 26-year-old Hannibal was proclaimed commander-in-chief by his troops and confirmed in this position by the Carthaginian government. Livy describes the scene. No sooner had he arrived, the old soldiers fancied they saw Hamilcar in his youth given back to them. The same bright look, the same fire in his eye, the same trick of countenance and features. Never was one and the same spirit more skillful to meet opposition, to obey, or to command. Hannibal quickly proved his worth by subduing several rebellious Iberian tribes. In 220 BCE, he conducted successful campaigns against the Alcades, a city allied with Rome but located south of the Ebro demonstrating his tactical brilliance between Roman and Carthaginian spheres of influence. The siege of Saguntum, a treaty signed by Hasdrubal. After an 8-month siege, Saguntum fell and Hannibal distributed the spoils among his troops while setting aside a portion for his war chest. Rome sent envoys to Carthage demanding Hannibal's surrender. When the Carthaginian Senate refused, the Second Punic War began. Rather than waiting for a Roman invasion, Hannibal made the audacious decision to take the fight directly to Italy. The Alpine Crossing. In late spring of 218 BCE, Hannibal departed from New Carthage, modern Cartagena, Spain, with approximately 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants. His plan to invade Italy by land was unprecedented and caught the Romans completely off guard. After crossing the Pyrenees and losing some troops who were reluctant to leave their homeland, Hannibal entered Gaul with about 50,000 infantry and 9,000 cavalry. He secured alliances with Gallic tribes and skillfully avoided a Roman force near Massilia, modern Marseille. The crossing of the Alps in late autumn of 218 BCE stands as one of history's most remarkable military achievements. Facing freezing temperatures, treacherous terrain, and hostile mountain tribes, Hannibal's army endured extreme hardships. According to Polybius, they spent 4 days and 3 nights through a land that was under water, suffering terribly from fatigue and lack of sleep. The Allobroges tribe attacked them in narrow mountain passes, rolling boulders down on the marching columns and ambushing stragglers. Hannibal countered with brilliant tactics, including night maneuvers to secure high ground and strategic positioning of his forces. By the time they descended into the Po Valley in northern Italy, Hannibal's army had been reduced to about 26,000 men, having lost nearly half his force to the elements, disease, desertion, and enemy action. Most of his elephants had perished as well, though contrary to popular belief, they did not all die during the crossing itself. Early victories in Italy. Hannibal's
these
first
losses,
encounter with
Hannibal's
Roman forces
achievement
in Italy
bringing an army
occurred near the
across the
Ticinus
Alps
River.
was
The Roman consul
unprecedented,
Publius
and
Cornelius
immediately won
Scipio
him the
led a
support of
cavalry
Gallic
force to
tribes in
reconnoitre
northern
Hannibal's
Italy,
position,
who had recently
but was
been
outmaneuvered
conquered
by
by
the
Rome.
superior Carthaginian and Numidian cavalry. Scipio himself was seriously wounded and would have been killed had his 17-year-old son, later known as Scipio Africanus, not bravely charged into the fray to rescue him. This defeat, though relatively minor, demonstrated Hannibal's cavalry superiority and encouraged more Gallic tribes to join his cause. The consul Tiberius Sempronius Longus, eager for glory, arrived with reinforcements and was determined to engage Hannibal in battle despite Scipio's warnings. Hannibal exploited this impetuosity with a carefully laid trap. On a cold winter morning, Hannibal sent his Numidian cavalry to harass the Roman camp, provoking Sempronius to pursue them. The Romans had to cross the freezing Trebia River, leaving them cold, wet, and hungry as they formed up for battle. Meanwhile, Hannibal's troops had eaten well and rested. Furthermore, Hannibal had placed his brother Mago and 2,000 elite troops in a concealed position along a riverbed. As the battle commenced, these hidden forces emerged behind the Roman lines, while Hannibal's cavalry outflanked them on both wings. Caught in this trap, the Roman army was decimated, with only 10,000 of their 40,000 men escaping. After wintering in the Po Valley, Hannibal crossed the Apennines and entered Etruria. The new Roman consul, Gaius Flaminius, pursued him without waiting for reinforcements, falling into another brilliantly conceived ambush. Hannibal positioned his forces along the northern shore of Lake Trasimene, concealing them in the morning mist and among the hills. As the Roman column marched along the narrow path between the hills and the lake, Hannibal's troops attacked from all sides. Unable to form proper battle lines in the confined space, the Romans were slaughtered. Flaminius himself was killed and 15,000 of his men died in what historian Polybius called the largest ambush in military history. After these devastating defeats, Rome appointed Quintus Fabius Maximus as dictator. Recognizing that Hannibal's army was superior in open battle, Fabius adopted a strategy of attrition into even another following Hannibal's forces at a safe distance. Fabius was heavily criticized in Rome for his cautious approach, earning the nickname "this approach," later known as Delayer. Nevertheless, his strategy prevented further catastrophic defeats and gave Rome time to rebuild its forces. In one famous episode, Hannibal found himself trapped in the Falernian plain with Roman forces blocking all exits. He escaped by having his men tie bundles of brushwood to the horns of cattle, set them alight at night, and drive them up the hillsides. The Romans, thinking this was the main Carthaginian army trying to escape, abandoned their positions to pursue the cattle, allowing Hannibal's actual army to slip away undetected. The Battle of Cannae. In 216 BCE, Rome abandoned the Fabian strategy and raised an enormous army of 80,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry under the command of consuls Lucius, Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro. They were determined to crush Hannibal once and for all. Hannibal, with only 40,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry, positioned his forces near the small town of Cannae. On August 2nd, 216 BCE, the two armies met in what would become one of the most studied battles in military history. Hannibal placed his weaker Gallic and Spanish infantry in the centre in a convex formation with his elite African infantry on the flanks. As the numerically superior Romans advanced, the Carthaginian centre gradually gave ground, drawing the Roman infantry deeper into a trap. Meanwhile, Hannibal's superior cavalry defeated the Roman horsemen on both wings and then wheeled around to attack the Roman infantry from behind. The result was a perfect double envelopment. Surrounded on all sides, the Roman army was compressed into such a tight mass that many soldiers could not even raise their arms to defend themselves. By day's end, 50 ye and 70 Romans lay dead, including Consul Aemilius Paulus, 80 senators, and numerous other high-ranking officials. It was one of the bloodiest single days of battle in all of human history. After this catastrophic defeat, Hannibal, Hannibal's cavalry commander, urged an immediate march on Rome, reportedly saying, "Despite his stunning victory at Cannae, Hannibal faced significant challenges. Many of Rome's Italian allies remained loyal, contrary to his expectations. That has been debated without siege equipment. He struggled to take fortified cities. The war in Italy stalemates. Perhaps most critically, Carthage failed to send substantial reinforcements, leaving him to fight with dwindling resources. Rome, meanwhile, adopted a modified version of Fabius's strategy, avoiding direct confrontation with Hannibal while attacking his allies and supply lines. They also opened new fronts in Spain, Sicily, and later Africa, forcing Carthage to divide its limited resources. For the next several years, Hannibal maintained control over much of southern Italy, but could not deliver a knockout blow to Rome. He won several more victories, including at Herdonia 212 BCE and Numistro 210 BCE, but these successes did not fundamentally change the strategic situation. In 207 BCE, Hannibal's brother Hasdrubal finally managed to cross the Alps with reinforcements, but was defeated and killed at the Battle of the Metaurus River before he could link up with Hannibal. According to Livy, the Romans informed Hannibal of this devastating loss by throwing Hasdrubal's severed head into his camp. By 203 BCE, with his position in Italy increasingly untenable, and Scipio Africanus threatening Carthage itself after successful campaigns in Spain and North Africa, Hannibal was recalled to defend his homeland. After 15 years in Italy, Hannibal reluctantly departed, leaving behind a trail of destruction, but ultimately failing in his mission to defeat Rome. Livy writes that he left with tears in his eyes, lamenting that his political enemies in Carthage had undermined his efforts from the beginning. In 202 BCE, Hannibal and Scipio met at the Battle of Zama. Despite Hannibal's tactical genius, several factors worked against him. His army consisted largely of inexperienced recruits. He lacked his usual cavalry advantage, as the Numidians had switched sides to join Scipio, and he faced a Roman general who had studied and learned from his own tactics. Scipio neutralized Hannibal's war elephants by creating lanes in his formation for them to pass through harmlessly. Then, the result was a decisive Roman victory. Carthage, the Roman and Numidian cavalry, accepting harsh terms that stripped it of its counterparts to navy and war elephants, while imposing a massive indemnity, employing the very double envelopment strategy that Hannibal had used over 50 years. Later, life and death. Despite his defeat, Hannibal returned to Carthage as a respected figure and was elected suffete, chief magistrate, in 196 BCE. He implemented financial and political reforms to help Carthage recover. including measures to eliminate corruption and reduce the power of the oligarchs. However, his reforms made powerful enemies, and in 195 BCE, under pressure from Rome, Hannibal was forced to flee Carthage. He spent the remaining years of his life in exile, serving as a military advisor to various enemies of Rome, including Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire and King Prusias IV of Bithynia. According to Plutarch, during this period Hannibal and Scipio Africanus met again, and when Scipio asked who Hannibal thought as the greatest general, he replied, "Alexander of Macedonia, followed by Pyrrhus of Epirus, and then himself." When Scipio asked where he would rank himself if he had not been defeated by Scipio, Hannibal reportedly answered, "In that case, I should have put myself before Alexander." In 183 BCE, with Roman agents closing in, Hannibal took poison rather than be captured. His last words, according to Livy, were, "Let us relieve the Romans from the anxiety they have so long experienced, since they think it tries their patience too much to wait for an old man's death." Legacy and historical Hannibal Barca's legacy extends far beyond his military campaigns. His strategic genius, tactical innovations, and leadership qualities have influenced military thinking for over 2 millennia. Hannibal revolutionized warfare in several ways. His use of the double envelopment at Cannae became a textbook maneuver studied by military commanders throughout history. German Field Marshal Alfred von Schlieffen based his famous Schlieffen Plan for World War I partly on Hannibal's tactics at Cannae. His masterful use of terrain, exemplified at Lake Trasimene, demonstrated how geography could be turned into a weapon. His psychological warfare using deception, surprise and fear and cultural showed an differences understanding of the human dimension of conflict unit.
that was far ahead of his time.
As historian Adrian Goldsworthy
Perhaps most
notes,
impressively,
one of the
Hannibal
greatest
commanded a
measures of
multinational
Hannibal's
force of
generalship
Africans,
is that he
Spaniards,
wins his victories
Gauls, and
not
others,
with an army that's
overcoming
followed him for
language
many
barriers.
years, but one that's made up of many different nationalities who don't speak the same language. Impact on Rome. Ironically, Hannibal's greatest legacy may have been his contribution to Rome's evolution into a dominant empire. The trauma of the Second Punic War forced Rome to adapt and improve its military, political, and diplomatic systems. The Romans learned from Hannibal's tactics, adopting more flexible military formations and placing greater emphasis on cavalry. They recognized the need for longer military commands, abandoning the practice of rotating generals annually when facing serious threats. And they developed a more aggressive imperial strategy, understanding that the best defense was often a good offense. As historian Victor Davis Hanson observes, it was only in the struggle to defeat Hannibal that Rome developed those strengths that allowed her to grow into world dominion, and Hannibal was the cause of all that. So in attempting to destroy Rome, paradoxically, he gave it birth. Cultural impact. In Roman culture, Hannibal became the archetypal enemy, feared, respected, and demonized. The phrase Hannibal ad portus, Hannibal is at the gates, became a proverbial expression of imminent disaster. Roman mothers would frighten misbehaving children with threats that Hannibal would come for them. Yet even in Rome there was grudging admiration for his military genius. The Romans built statues of Hannibal in their streets, not to honour him, but to demonstrate their triumph over such a worthy adversary. In modern Tunisia, Hannibal is revered as a national hero. His profile appears on Tunisian currency, and streets and institutions bear his name. He symbolizes a time when North Africa was home to a civilization that could challenge the greatest powers of the Mediterranean. Hannibal's leadership style combined charisma with pragmatism. Unlike many ancient commanders who directed from the rear, he led from the front, sharing his men's hardships and dangers. Against aggressive Roman generals, he slept on the ground Sempronius and Flaminius, enduring the same cold and privation. Against the cautious Fabius, he was also remarkably adaptable, adjusting Hannibal's grand strategy was bold and innovative. Opponents. Rather than defending Carthaginian territories against Roman aggression, he took the fight to the enemy's homeland. His plan to break Rome's Italian confederation by demonstrating Roman vulnerability was sound in concept, even if it ultimately failed in execution. He understood the importance of intelligence and reconnaissance, maintaining an extensive network of spies and scouts that provided crucial information about enemy movements and terrain. This intelligence advantage allowed him to anticipate Roman actions and position his forces accordingly. On the battlefield, Hannibal consistently outmaneuvered his Roman opponents. He excelled at using terrain to his advantage, as seen at Lake Trasimene, where he used the morning mist and surrounding hills to conceal his troops. His masterpiece at Cannae demonstrated his understanding of psychology as well as tactics. By allowing his centre to be pushed back while maintaining discipline, he exploited the Romans' aggressive instincts to lure them into a trap. Hannibal was also adept at combined arms warfare, integrating infantry, cavalry and elephants into a cohesive fighting force. His cavalry, particularly the Numidian light horsemen, gave him a mobility advantage that he exploited repeatedly. To fully understand Hannibal, we must consider the civilization he fought for. Carthage was fundamentally different from Rome in its social structure, values, and approach to warfare. Carthaginian society and government Carthage was governed by an oligarchy of wealthy merchant families with 2 elected suffetes, similar to Roman consuls, serving as chief magistrates. A council of elders and a larger assembly of citizens provided checks and balances. Unlike Rome's citizen-soldier model, Carthage relied heavily on mercenaries for its military needs. This reflected its commercial orientation. It was more economical to hire professional soldiers than to maintain a standing army of citizens. Carthaginian religion centered on gods like Baal Hammon and Tanit. The Barcid faction that sometimes included child sacrifice, according to Roman sources, a hawkish, though archaeological militaristic suggestion this may have been exaggerated, led by Hanno the Barcid family had this internal division complicated Carthage's version of Hercules. Hamilcar Barca had established a semi-autonomous domain in Spain which his son-in-law Hasdrubal and later Hannibal expanded. This Spanish base provided the resources, silver, manpower and training grounds that made Hannibal's Italian campaign possible. However, the Barcids' independence also meant that when Hannibal needed reinforcements during the Italian campaign, the Carthaginian government could and did prioritize other theatres of war, leaving him to fight largely on his own resources. So, why did Hannibal fail? Despite his tactical brilliance and numerous victories, Hannibal ultimately failed to achieve his strategic objective of breaking Rome's power. Several factors contributed to this outcome. Limited resources. Carthage never fully committed to Hannibal's Italian campaign. After Cannae, when he requested reinforcements to exploit his victory, the Carthaginian Senate sent most available forces to Spain and Sardinia instead. This lack of support meant Hannibal could never replace his losses or expand his operations beyond southern Italy. Roman resilience. The Romans displayed extraordinary determination in the face of catastrophic defeats. After Cannae, they raised new armies, refused to negotiate for peace, and even rejected ransoming their captured soldiers. This unyielding resolve was something Hannibal had not anticipated. As Polybius noted, how much more serious was the defeat of Cannae than those that preceded it can be seen by the behaviour of Rome's allies. Before that fateful day, their loyalty remained unshaken. Now it began to waver for the simple reason that they despaired of Roman power. Yet this wavering proved insufficient. Most of Rome's Italian allies remained loyal, denying Hannibal the coalition he needed to truly challenge Roman hegemony. Strategic limitations. Hannibal's army was designed for mobile warfare, not sieges. Without proper siege equipment, he struggled to take fortified cities, limiting his ability to consolidate control over territories he had overrun. A direct assault extremely risky. His decision not to march on the multi-front war Cannae has been debated. While Hannibal was tied down in Italy, Rome opened new fronts. While some criticised this as a missed opportunity, Africa. Others point out that Rome's formidable walls and the remaining Roman forces prevented Hannibal from receiving the reinforcements he needed. The Roman victory at the Metaurus River in 207 BCE, where Hasdrubal was defeated and killed before he could join his brother, marked the turning point of the war. From that moment, Hannibal's position in Italy became increasingly untenable. The human dimension beyond the battles and strategies, it's important to consider Hannibal as a person, his motivations, character, and the psychological impact of his lifelong struggle against Rome. Personal motivations. Hannibal's childhood oath to never be a friend of Rome shaped his entire life. This was more than political enmity. It was a sacred vow made before the gods, binding him to a path from which he could not deviate. His desire to avenge his father's humiliation and to restore Carthage's honour drove him to extraordinary achievements, but also prevented him from considering alternatives that might have better served his country's interests. Character and temperament. Contemporary accounts describe Hannibal as disciplined, austere, and focused. Unlike many ancient commanders, he was not known for indulging in luxury or excess. He shared his men's hardships and led by example. He displayed remarkable equanimity in both victory and defeat. After Cannae, he did not become overconfident. After Zama, he pragmatically accepted the need for peace and turned his attention to rebuilding Carthage. Psychological impact. The psychological burden of Hannibal's lifelong struggle must have been immense. For 16 years in Italy, he maintained an army in hostile territory, constantly outnumbered and with dwindling resources. The pressure to succeed, to justify the sacrifices made, would have weighed heavily on him. His final years in exile, hunted by Rome across the Mediterranean, reveal a man who remained defiant to the end. His suicide was a final act of defiance, denying Rome the satisfaction of capturing him alive. While literary sources provide most of our information about Hannibal, Archaeological discoveries have added in the Col de la Traversette and occasionally confirmed Hannibal's likely crossing points of his campaign. Analysis of soil samples revealed recent archaeological work has shed light on Hannibal's route across the Alps. In 2016, a team led by Bill Mahaney discovered evidence of horses and mules. This mass animal deposition is consistent with the passage of Hannibal's army and pack animals. At Lake Trasimene, archaeological investigations have uncovered what appear to be mass cremation pits, supporting ancient accounts that Hannibal ordered the burning of Roman corpses to prevent disease outbreaks. At Cannae, excavations have revealed Roman equipment and weapons scattered across the battlefield, confirming the massive scale of the engagement and the completeness of the Roman defeat. Excavations at Carthage itself have revealed sophisticated urban planning, advanced water management systems, and evidence of international trade networks. These findings confirm ancient descriptions of Carthage as a wealthy, technologically advanced civilization. The discovery of child burials in the Tophet, sacred precinct of Carthage, has sparked debate about Carthaginian religious practices, though recent analysis suggests many of these were stillborn infants rather than sacrificial victims. Our understanding of Hannibal comes primarily from Roman and Greek historians, none of whom were eyewitnesses to his campaigns. This creates challenges in separating fact from propaganda. Primary sources. The most important ancient sources on Hannibal are Polybius, c. 200-318 BCE, a Greek historian who interviewed veterans of the Second Punic War and had access to now lost Carthaginian sources. His account is considered the most reliable, though only portions of his work survive. 2. Livy, 59 BCE 17 CE. A Roman historian whose detailed account of the war draws heavily on Polybius but adds dramatic elements and a more pro-Roman perspective. 3. Appian, c. 95 to 165 CE. A Greek historian whose account includes details not found in other sources, particularly about Hannibal's later life. 4. Cornelius Nepos, c. 310-24 BCE. A Roman biographer who wrote a short life of Hannibal that includes information about his exile and death. As historian Patrick Hunt notes, most of what we have comes from a Roman perspective. Present Hannibal primarily through Roman eyes. Is he often portraying him as cruel, horrible man? The real Hannibal is somewhere lost in these images. Yet they also acknowledge his military lack of surviving Carthaginian leadership qualities. We must read between the lines to glimpse Hannibal's own perspective and motivations. Hannibal's achievements can be better understood by comparing him to other great military leaders of antiquity. Like Alexander, Hannibal was a bold, innovative commander who led from the front and inspired fierce loyalty in his troops. Both conducted campaigns far from their home bases, adapting to local conditions and incorporating foreign troops into their armies. However, while Alexander conquered vast territories and established a lasting empire, Hannibal's victories did not translate into permanent territorial gains. This reflects the different strategic contexts they faced. Alexander fought against the declining Persian Empire, while Hannibal confronted the rising power of Rome. Both Hannibal and Caesar were masters of rapid movement, surprise, and adaptability. Both understood the psychological dimension of warfare and used it to their advantage. Caesar, however, had the full resources of Rome behind him, while Hannibal fought with limited support from Carthage. Caesar also excelled at political manipulation, whereas Hannibal's political skills were primarily demonstrated after his military career. Scipio Africanus Scipio, who ultimately defeated Hannibal at Zama, learned from his opponent's tactics and adapted them for Roman use. Both generals were innovative, flexible, and willing to break with tradition when necessary. Their mutual respect, exemplified in their reported conversation about history's greatest generals, suggests a recognition that they were kindred spirits in their approach to warfare, despite fighting on opposite sides. The destruction of Carthage. Though Hannibal's defeat at Zama ended the Second Punic War, it did not end the conflict between Rome and Carthage. In 149 BCE, nearly 50 years after Zama, and more than 30 years after Hannibal's death, Rome launched the Third Punic War. After a 3-year siege, Carthage fell in 146 This
BCE.
utter destruction of Carthage can be
The
seen
Romans
as the
systematically
destroyed
the
that
city,
began with
killing
Hannibal's
or
enslaving
invasion of
its
Italy.
population and
Rome's
reportedly
fear of
sowing the ground
Carthaginian
with
resurgence
salt to ensure
embodied in
nothing would
Cato,
grow there again.
the elder's famous
Though this
phrase,
last detail is likely a
Carthago
later
delenda
embellishment.
est,
Carthage must be destroyed, stemmed directly from the trauma inflicted by Hannibal. As historian Adrian Goldsworthy observes, what still terrified them was the spectre of Hannibal. And in the end, that was why they destroyed Carthage. Carthage had scared them too much, and Carthage had scared them mainly in the person of Hannibal. Hannibal's place in history. Hannibal Barca stands as one of history's most brilliant military commanders, a tactical genius whose achievements continue to inspire awe more than 2 millennia after his death. His crossing of the Alps, his stunning victories at Trebia, Lake Trasimene and Cannae, and his ability to maintain an army in hostile territory for 16 years all testify to his extraordinary capabilities. Yet his ultimate failure to defeat Rome also reveals the limitations of even the most brilliant individual when faced with the collective resilience and resources of a determined adversary. Rome's ability to absorb catastrophic defeats, raise new armies, and continue fighting ultimately proved decisive. Perhaps the most fitting epitaph for Hannibal comes from the Roman historian Livy, who despite his Roman bias could not help but admire his enemy's qualities. Never was one and the same spirit more skillful to meet opposition, to obey, or to command. He had great physical endurance. No amount of labour could exhaust his body or defeat his spirit. He could endure heat and cold equally well. He was the first to enter battle and the last to leave the field. In the final analysis, Hannibal's greatest legacy may be that he forced Rome to become the empire it was destined to be. By challenging Rome at the height of its republican power, he compelled it to develop the military, political, and psychological resilience that would later enable it to dominate the Mediterranean world for centuries. As historian Tom Holland notes, Hannibal's war with Rome marks a watershed in the evolution of the Roman Empire. The paradox of Hannibal's life before
is
the
that
war
in
with
to
Hannibal,
destroy
Rome wasn't
he
a power
inadvertently
beyond
strengthened
Italy. Afterwards,
His
it had
tactical
Spain,
brilliance on the
it had a
battlefield was
subservient
ultimately
North
outmatched
Africa.
by Rome's
This was the
strategic
beginning of
resilience
Rome's
and its
domination
ability
of the
to
whole
learn
of the
from
Mediterranean.
defeat.
Yet in this very failure, Hannibal achieved a kind of immortality. His name and deeds remembered long after the empire he served had been reduced to ruins. As the Greek historian Polybius wrote, it is a remarkable and very cogent proof of Hannibal's having been by nature a real leader and far superior to anyone else in statesmanship, that though he spent 17 years in the field, passed through so many barbarous countries, and employed to aid him in desperate and extraordinary enterprises, numbers of men of different nations and languages, no one ever dreamt of conspiring against him, nor was he ever deserted by those who had once joined him or submitted to him. Hannibal's military innovations in detail combined arms warfare. One of Hannibal's most significant military innovations was his sophisticated integration of different types of troops, infantry, cavalry, and elephants, into a cohesive fighting force. Unlike the Romans, who relied primarily on their heavy infantry legions, Hannibal understood the value of specialized units working in concert. His army typically deployed in 3 lines. First line, light infantry, skirmishers, slingers, and javelin throwers, who would harass the enemy and then withdraw. Second line, heavy infantry, primarily Gauls, Spaniards, and Africans, who formed the main battle line. Third line, elite African infantry, often held in reserve for decisive moments. On the wings, he positioned his cavalry, heavy Spanish and Gallic horsemen on one flank, and the lightning-fast Numidian light cavalry on the other. This arrangement allowed Hannibal to adapt to different battlefield situations. At Cannae, for example, he reversed his usual formation, placing his weakest troops in the centre and his strongest on the flanks, creating the famous crescent formation that enveloped the Roman army. Psychological warfare. At Lake Trasimene, was a master of psychological the morning mist warfare, and the using deception to create a sense surprise, of disorientation and terror to undermine enemy morale. At the Trebia, his night manoeuvres, false retreats, and ambushes weakened the Roman commanders before engaging balance. Even his use of war elephants, while of limited tactical value, had enormous psychological impact. The sight and sound of these massive beasts charging toward infantry who had never encountered them before could induce panic and break formations before physical contact was even made. Adaptability and intelligence. Perhaps Hannibal's greatest strength was his adaptability. Unlike many ancient commanders who adhered rigidly to established tactics, he constantly innovated based on the specific circumstances he faced. This adaptability was supported by an exceptional intelligence network. Hannibal employed scouts, spies, and informants throughout Italy, giving him detailed knowledge of terrain, Roman movements, and the political situation in various Italian communities. He also studied his opponents carefully, learning their personal tendencies and exploiting them. He knew that Sempronius was eager for glory and used this to lure him into battle at the Trebia. He recognized Flaminius's impulsiveness and used it to draw him into the trap at Lake Trasimene. The Carthaginian military system mercenary forces. Unlike Rome's citizen-soldier model, Carthage relied primarily on mercenaries for its military needs. This reflected its commercial orientation. It was more economical to hire professional soldiers than to maintain a standing army of citizens. Hannibal's army included Libyans, heavy infantry equipped in the Greek hoplite style with large shields, breastplates, helmets, greaves, and long spears. Iberians, medium infantry using a short double-edged sword, the forerunner of the Roman gladius, and a small shield. Gauls, fierce warriors who often fought bare-chested, wielding long, slashing swords. Numidians, light cavalry from North Africa, renowned for their horsemanship and ability to harass enemy formations. Balearic Islanders, slingers who could hurl stones with deadly accuracy. This diverse force presented challenges in terms of language, training standards, and loyalty. Hannibal's ability to forge these disparate elements into a cohesive army was one of his
after the First Punic
War, Rome had seized naval supremacy. Traditionally, Carthage had been
forcing
Hannibal
to
take
dominating
the
the
western
Italy.
Mediterranean
Lack of naval support
fleet of
critical
during the
the
Italian campaign. Without control of the sea, Hannibal could not be reliably resupplied from Carthage, limiting his ability to conduct sieges or maintain his position in Italy over the long term. War elephants. Carthage's use of war elephants was one of its most distinctive military features. These were not the massive Asian elephants familiar to modern audiences, but smaller North African forest elephants, now extinct. Trained to charge enemy formations, these elephants could break infantry lines and cause panic among troops and horses unfamiliar with them. They were typically guided by a mahout driver who carried a spike and mallet. If the elephant went berserk, the mahout would drive the spike into the base of the animal's skull, killing it instantly to prevent it from trampling friendly forces. By the time of the Second Punic War, the Romans had developed countermeasures against elephants, including creating lanes in their formations for the beasts to pass through harmlessly. At Zama, Scipio employed this tactic effectively, neutralizing Hannibal's elephant charge. Hannibal's campaigns in detail. The Spanish campaign, 221–218 BCE. Before invading Italy, Hannibal spent 3 years consolidating Carthaginian control in Spain. He subdued several rebellious tribes, including the Olcades, Vacaei and Carpetani, demonstrating the tactical skills that would later serve him against Rome. The Battle of the Tagus River in 220 BCE was particularly significant, facing a much larger force of Iberians. Hannibal crossed the river secretly at night and surprised the enemy, achieving victory by lunchtime with minimal losses. These campaigns served multiple purposes. They secured Carthage's Spanish silver mines, essential for financing the war, provided training for his troops, and established Hannibal's reputation as a commander. The Italian campaign, 218–203 BCE. Hannibal's 16-year campaign in Italy can be divided into several phases. Initial invasion and victories, 218–216 BCE. From the Alpine crossing to the triumph at Cannae, this phase saw Hannibal at his most brilliant, but failed to break every Roman army sent against the Romans, him. Now following a modified Fabian strategy, 216 avoided direct confrontation, BCE, gradual decline. After Cannae, Hannibal secured alliances with several Rome southern Italian cities and opened new fronts in Spain and Sicily. Hannibal's position in Italy became increasingly precarious. The death of his brother Hasdrubal at the Metaurus River in 207 BCE marked the beginning of the end. Throughout this campaign, Hannibal displayed remarkable resilience and adaptability. Despite being cut off from regular supplies and reinforcements, he maintained an effective fighting force in hostile territory for over a decade and a half, an achievement unparalleled in ancient warfare. The African campaign, 203–202 BCE, recalled to defend Carthage against Scipio's invasion. Hannibal returned to North Africa in 203 BCE. He spent several months training a new army, incorporating his veterans from Italy with fresh recruits. At Zama, he faced a Roman general who had studied his tactics and learned from them. Scipio neutralized Hannibal's elephants, matched his cavalry with Numidian allies, and ultimately turned Hannibal's own double envelopment strategy against him. Despite this defeat, Hannibal's performance at Zama demonstrated his continued tactical acumen. With an inferior army, he still managed to inflict significant casualties on the Romans before being overwhelmed. The political dimension: Carthaginian politics. Carthage's political system was dominated by wealthy merchant families who often prioritized commercial interests over military considerations. This created tensions with the more militaristic Barcid faction, led by Hamilcar and later Hannibal. After the First Punic War, Hamilcar had established a semi-autonomous domain in Spain, which provided the resources for Hannibal's campaign. However, this independence also meant that when Hannibal needed reinforcements, the Carthaginian government could, and did, prioritize other theatres of war. The political divisions within Carthage were exemplified by the rivalry between the Barcids and the peace party led by Hanno the Great. Roman politics. When Mago brought news of Rome's the victory at Cannae to Carthage, annually elected Hanno reportedly asked whether any Roman allies had defected, or whether any Latin cities had gone over to Hannibal. When told no, he argued that the war led commanders like Sempronius and Flaminius to seek battle when caution would have been wiser. However, the Roman system also demonstrated remarkable resilience. After the disaster at Cannae, the Senate took firm control of the war effort, appointing experienced commanders and maintaining a consistent strategy despite changing magistrates. The war also accelerated changes in Roman society. The heavy casualties suffered by the aristocracy created opportunities for social mobility, while the emergency measures taken during the war expanded the power of the central government at the expense of traditional constraints. Diplomatic manoeuvring. Both Rome and Carthage engaged in extensive diplomatic efforts to secure allies and isolate their opponents. Hannibal's diplomatic strategy focused on breaking Rome's Italian confederation by demonstrating that Rome could not protect its allies. After victories, he often released captured Italian allies without ransom, declaring that he had come to liberate them from Roman domination. Rome, meanwhile, worked to isolate Carthage diplomatically. They maintained their Italian alliances through a combination of concessions, threats, and demonstrations of resolve. They also secured alliances with Numidian kingdoms in North Africa, which would prove crucial in the later stages of the war. On the international stage, Hannibal attempted to create a broader anti-Roman coalition. In 215 BCE, he negotiated an alliance with Philip V of Macedon, opening a new front in the eastern Mediterranean. However, Rome successfully countered this by forming its own alliance with the Aetolian League, effectively neutralizing the Macedonian threat. Hannibal's post-war career: political reforms in Carthage. After returning to Carthage, Hannibal was elected suffete, chief magistrate, in 196 BCE. He implemented significant political and financial reforms aimed at rebuilding Carthage and paying the war indemnity imposed by Rome. His reforms included financial restructuring. He conducted an audit of state finances, uncovered widespread
reducing the
corruption
power of the
and
oligarchs,
implemented measures to recover
limits.
embezzled funds.
He established that no member of
political
the 104
democratization
could serve for 2 consecutive
He changed the
years,
selection process for the
preventing
Council
the
of the
entrenchment of
104,
power.
a powerful
These
judicial
reforms
body
made him
from
powerful
co-option
enemies
to
among the
direct
Carthaginian
election, elite, who eventually collaborated with Rome to force him into exile. Exile and service to foreign powers. Fleeing Carthage in 195 BCE, Hannibal first went to Tyre, the ancestral homeland of the Phoenicians, before joining the court of Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire. As a military advisor to Antiochus, Hannibal advocated for an aggressive strategy against Rome, including a proposed invasion of Italy. However, court intrigue and Antiochus's reluctance to give too much authority to a foreigner meant that his advice was often ignored. After the Seleucid defeat in the Roman-Syrian War, Hannibal fled to Crete and then to the court of King Prusias V of Bithynia. There he helped Prusias in his war against Rome's ally, King Eumenes II of Pergamon. In one famous episode, Hannibal devised a novel form of biological warfare by having clay pots filled with venomous snakes thrown onto enemy ships during a naval battle, causing panic and confusion among Eumenes' sailors. Final days and death. By 183 BCE, Roman pressure on Prusias to surrender Hannibal had become too great to resist. Rather than face capture and humiliation, Hannibal took poison, reportedly saying, "Let us relieve the Romans from the anxiety they have so long experienced, since they think it tries their patience too much to wait for an old man's death." His death marked the end of a lifelong struggle against Rome that had begun with his childhood oath. Though ultimately unsuccessful, his resistance had delayed Rome's rise to unchallenged supremacy in the Mediterranean for nearly 2 decades. Archaeological insights into Hannibal's world. Carthaginian urban life. Archaeological excavations at Carthage have revealed a sophisticated urban centre with advanced infrastructure. The city featured a grid-like street plan, multi-storey buildings and an elaborate water management system that included cisterns, aqueducts and sewers. The famous artificial harbours of Carthage, described by ancient authors, private homes excavated in Carthage, show evidence of wealth and international connections. The circular military harbour imported Greek pottery, Egyptian artifacts and luxury goods, while the rectangular commercial harbour handled merchant vessels, military equipment and technology. Archaeological finds from battlefields and military camps have provided insights into the equipment used by Hannibal's multinational army. Spanish swords recovered from sites in Italy confirm ancient descriptions of their quality and effectiveness. These short double-edged weapons were so impressive that the Romans adopted a modified version, the gladius hispaniensis, as their standard infantry sword. Sling bullets bearing Punic inscriptions have been found at several sites, some with messages like, "Take that," or the name of a commander, suggesting psychological warfare elements in their use. The remains of defensive works at New Carthage, modern Cartagena, Spain, demonstrate the sophisticated military engineering capabilities of the Carthaginians, with massive walls, towers and gates designed to resist siege engines. Trade networks and economy archaeological evidence confirms the extensive trade networks that underpinned Carthage's wealth and power. Carthaginian coins, pottery and other goods have been found throughout the Mediterranean from Spain to Egypt. The silver mines of southern Spain, which financed Hannibal's war effort, have been excavated, revealing sophisticated extraction and processing techniques. Analysis of lead pollution in Greenland ice cores has confirmed the intensive mining activity during the Barcid period. Shipwrecks discovered off the coasts of Sicily, Sardinia and Spain have yielded Carthaginian trade goods, including amphorae that once contained wine, olive oil and garum, fish sauce, as well as luxury items like ivory, precious metals and textiles. Hannibal in popular culture and memory, ancient representations. In Roman literature and art, Hannibal was portrayed as the quintessential enemy, cunning, cruel and barbaric, yet also possessed of undeniable genius. Cicero called him that most skillful of all generals, while Juvenal referred to him as, in the final analysis, Hannibal's greatest legacy may be that he forced Rome to become Greek the writers tended to be more sympathetic. By challenging Rome at the height of its republican occasional cruelty, he compelled it to develop the military, political and psychological resilience that would later enable it to dominate the Mediterranean world for centuries. As historian Tom Holland notes, Hannibal's war with Rome marks a watershed in the evolution of the Roman Empire. Basically, before the war with Hannibal, Rome wasn't a power beyond Italy. Afterwards, it had Spain, it had a subservient North Africa. This was the beginning of Rome's domination of the whole of the Mediterranean. The paradox of Hannibal's life is that in seeking to destroy Rome, he inadvertently strengthened it. His tactical brilliance on the battlefield was ultimately outmatched by Rome's strategic resilience and its ability to learn from defeat. Yet in this very failure, Hannibal achieved a kind of immortality, his name and deeds remembered long after the empire he served had been reduced to ruins. As the Greek historian Polybius wrote, "It is a remarkable and very cogent proof of Hannibal's having been by nature a real leader and far superior to anyone else in statesmanship, that though he spent 17 years in the field, passed through so many barbarous countries and employed to aid him in desperate and extraordinary enterprises numbers of men of different nations and languages, no one ever dreamt of conspiring against him, nor was he ever deserted by those who had once joined him or submitted to him. Hannibal's military innovations in detail combined arms warfare. One of Hannibal's most significant military innovations was his sophisticated integration of different types of troops, infantry, cavalry and elephants, into a cohesive fighting force. Unlike the Romans, who relied primarily on their heavy infantry legions, Hannibal understood the value of specialized units working in concert. His army typically deployed in 3 lines. First line, light infantry, skirmishers, slingers and javelin throwers, who would harass the enemy and then withdraw. Second line, heavy infantry, primarily Gauls, Spaniards and Africans, who formed the main battle line. This arrangement allowed Hannibal to adapt to different African infantry situations held in reserve for decisive moments. For example, he reversed on the wings he positioned his cavalry, placing his weakest troops in the centre on one flank and his strongest on the flanks, creating the famous crescent formation that enveloped the Roman army. Psychological warfare. Hannibal was a master of psychological warfare, using deception, surprise, and terror to undermine enemy morale. His night maneuvers, false retreats, and ambushes kept Roman commanders constantly off balance. At Lake Trasimene, he exploited the morning mist and the terrain to create a sense of disorientation among the Romans. At the Trebia, he used the cold weather and the river crossing to physically weaken the Roman troops before engaging them. Even his use of war elephants, while of limited tactical value, had enormous psychological impact. The sight and sound of these massive beasts charging toward infantry who had never encountered them before could induce panic and break formations before physical contact was even made. Adaptability and intelligence. Perhaps Hannibal's greatest strength was his adaptability. Unlike many ancient commanders who adhered rigidly to established tactics, he constantly innovated based on the specific circumstances he faced. This adaptability was supported by an exceptional intelligence network. Hannibal employed scouts, spies, and informants throughout Italy, giving him detailed knowledge of terrain, Roman movements, and the political situation in various Italian communities. He also studied his opponents carefully, learning their personal tendencies and exploiting them. He knew that Sempronius was eager for glory and used this to lure him into battle at the Trebia. He recognized Flaminius's impulsiveness and used it to draw him into the trap at Lake Trasimene. The Carthaginian military system, mercenary forces. Unlike Rome's citizen-soldier model, Carthage relied primarily on mercenaries for its military needs. This reflected its commercial orientation. It was more economical to hire professional soldiers than to maintain a standing army of citizens. Hannibal's army included Libyans, heavy infantry equipped in the Greek hoplite style with large shields, breastplates, helmets, greaves, and long spears. Iberians, medium infantry using a short double-edged sword, the forerunner of the Roman gladius, and a small shield. Gauls, fierce warriors who often fought bare-chested, wielding long slashing swords.